In the midst of rapid decarbonization and rising demand, what innovative leaders are at the forefront of the industry? You're listening to Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler, EPSA's president and CEO. While we missed him at this year's Competitive Power Summit, where he would have been on our innovation panel, we're thrilled Covarrubia Energy CEO and Chairman Russell Covarrubia was able to join us to discuss Covarrubia Energy's stake in emergent technologies like pyrolysis, which could be influential in bringing about a more reliable energy expansion through conversion of existent mass into usable energy. Russell, thanks so much for joining us today for this conversation. We missed you at our Competitive Power Summit, but you had some very important work that maybe you'll want to share with us why you couldn't join us. So before we get started, it's always nice for people that aren't familiar to get a little bit of background with you. So you spent some time in the finance world working on Wall Street. You're also a Marine veteran. Thank you for your service. We certainly appreciate that. And now you're the founder of Covarrubia Energy, and that's a pretty diverse background. And so if you can, kind of help us think through how that array of experiences has helped you focus on this technology and renewable energy solutions like pyrolysis that we'll get into here in a bit for those that aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes down to it, when I left Iraq and came back stateside, that's when I became a field engineer. I actually was trained by the Marine Corps on utility assets and how to manage them, how to operate them, and how to maintain them. So my obsession with power probably started, I'd say, right around 2010, 2011, and how I was fascinated on how generation works and how
Mm-hmm.
if people knew how complicated it was to turn on their lights. But at the end of the day, from there, I always knew that I wanted to be either an SEC lawyer or a stockbroker. So one of the others,
Okay.
and I ended up getting into being a hedge fund manager for a bit, and not being able to really get up close and personal with companies is really what mitigated me from wanting to push further into that
Mhm.
career. So I moved over to private equity. And I really like private equity, but it's also you have to use other people's money, which comes with other people's opinions.
Yep.
And there came a point in time where we exited out of another business and we started our family office and started to invest in ESG and renewable technology. And the concept that I always had is we need a renewable gas source because wind and
Mm-hmm.
solar is a great concept on paper, but beyond theoretical, it just doesn't work the way we want it to, especially for the demand of our society today. It's too high, and there's not enough wind, and there's definitely not enough solar fields to make that happen. And the battery issue is a whole separate situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to start looking at technologies that could take a bio waste or some sort of waste product and turn it into gases, not fuels, but gases
Mm-hmm.
that were carbon free, not just carbon neutral, but carbon free. So no incineration or anything like that. We invested in our first company back in 2016 on anaerobic digesters. Anaerobic digesters are great technology, but they are riddled with variables you cannot control. You're dealing with living organisms in them that can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And that can be very complicated when you're trying to make a predictable
Yep.
power output. So we ended up abandoning what that would look like predominantly for that. And our chief technology officer, Dr. Shane Carter, actually, he's the one that led us to pyrolysis. Dr. Carter and I were sitting on a call, and I asked him, what would be something that we could take and generate gases very sustainable for very long periods of
Mm-hmm.
time for power generation. He's like, that's pyrolysis. And we started comparing notes and started looking into it and other technologies and how we could make a technology that was capable of being manufactured efficiently, quickly, get the financial support that it needed, and get from point A to point B without too much fuss. And that landed on ablative disk pyrolysis. And that is what That's part of Covarrubia Energy. We are essentially a power generation company, is what we are in developing that. But we use the pyrolysis to power
Mhm.
methodology to make that generation occur.
So this is not an engineering podcast, so we'll ask you to walk us through a little bit about what pyrolysis actually is, because some of our
Yeah.
listeners may not know, others may have a cursory understanding. You clearly have a pretty in-depth understanding of this. So what does it entail? How long does it take to get it from what it is when you start to the green hydrogen that gets into the system? How much energy does it provide? How does it compare to other technologies? Kind of the 101 or the 201 for folks that may not be as up to speed on this specific technology as you are.
Absolutely. So we selected ablative disc pyrolysis, which is essentially a chamber with a flightless screw in the center that is electronically heated on both sides of the screw and transfers that like current
Hmm.
onto a stainless steel screw that then gets to a very specific temperature to then break down the hydrocarbons in plastic to their core forms, which is natural gas and oil.
Hmm.
Let's just call it what it is. So we get it up to that temperature, allow the plastics to enter the chamber, and once it's about an 8 to 10 minute dwell time to generate the gases from what we're targeting is between 3.5 and 4 tons per hour of input of
Okay.
feedstock. And that feedstock, it's pelletized, right? So
Okay.
we make it in a very small form, so it allows it to enter the chamber very fluidly, but it also allows it to transport easily. And then we'll generate between 390 MMBTU or 412 gigajoules per day from that input of plastic, which is about 3 to 4 megawatts of power per
Okay.
screw. But our goal is obviously 700 megawatts of power. So we
Hmm.
stack these in a module standpoint, similar to like a computer hard drive.
Yep.
When you need that extra terabyte of data, you add on an extra hard drive type situation. So that's essentially the technology. It's not overly complicated. There's no incineration because there's no oxygen. That gas makeup is 80 of renewable natural gas and 20% of turquoise hydrogen. Todd, you know why I state that? So we've got to be politically correct, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Uh,
know how many more shades of hydrogen we're going to get, but I lost track after about four. So I'll defer to
yeah,
the experts on that.
Yeah, same. I think
Yeah.
we're consider turquoise hydrogen,
Okay.
not green hydrogen per se,
Yep.
given it's not from wind and solar
Right.
derived. So
So what are the benefits as you kind of apply the technology? I mean, I can see two or three different things that are the top of mind for me that I go, this solves a couple of pretty important issues, but how are you looking at that either as your business case or just kind of how you've looked at like this is what we're doing, these are our inputs, these are our outputs, this is the problem we're solving.
yeah, how we look at it is energy in and energy out. So we produce, I mean, the amount of energy it takes to make plastic, and we have so much of it on this
Right.
earth. And I was reading, I believe it was The Economist. There, in a barrel of oil, 50% of it goes to producing new plastics that are currently going to be in the cycle.
Hmm.
So that's energy in, right?
Yeah.
So how do we get that energy out? And while mechanical recycling has been trying for better part of 2 decades to, get to that higher energy output, only 1% of plastics have ever been capable of being
Okay.
mechanically recycled, right? So that then changes the definition of what recycling looks like. So we're not considered a recycler or anything like that. We just want to essentially take that waste and turn it into a fuel source.
Hmm.
So that energy in, energy out component is how we really view it. And a significant amount of energy goes into our plastic production, just here in the United States, not just globally.
Right.
But that energy in, energy out is the equation, and we can get a substantial amount of energy out of plastics that we currently have on this earth. So.
Hey, can you explain just a little bit about, as I recall, you're a little bit plastic agnostic. It doesn't have to be a certain number on your, for those that are, remember the
Correct.
triangle with the one through whatever the numbers. You don't, you're agnostic to that, right? This technology
Correct.
takes whatever the input is, and you can use this process to convert that to energy.
That is correct. We can take any sort of plastic but PVC, but we do typically focus on the lower grade plastics.
Hmm.
Some mechanical recyclers and other pyrolysis technology like Altera and Freepoint can use them to turn into oils, which is still an important
Okay.
part of the business.
Sure.
So we want to play with all the other pyrolysis technologies. We're not the only player in the game.
Yep.
We want other partners to feel included in it. So we can take any plastics though, besides PVC. So.
Great. So now talk to me a little bit about your where you are in your development process. As we mentioned at the outset, you couldn't join us at the Competitive Power Summit because you were doing some important work. Do you have anything that you can share as far as where the technology is for both how far you are or where you stand on your process and kind of nothing that you shouldn't share, but just kind of an update on where we are on the approvals and testing and kind of what's the state of
Yeah,
affairs?
we're at the final stage. So serial number 001 has been prepared
Okay.
and is on its way to Columbus to go to testing with our unmentionable
Right.
partner, given who they are. They're going to do a third-party gas test on our technology for the pipelines. Once we get that gas certification, the bankers will be satisfied to
Yeah.
allow us to go to commercialization. So. We're also going to be working on the technology wrap with a big EPC, one of the largest, and then OEM selection for the manufacturing of our system because we're doing everything third party. So
Right.
we're essentially passing that screw over to the third party
Mhm.
validators and saying, hey, here's how it should work. Here's all of the components, operating manuals. Make it do what we need it to do, and they will do such. Once we get that certification, we should get, was it Title 47 status, and then we can really run. And it'll be the first very long time that a first
Yeah.
of a kind has been DOE certified. So.
I should have asked a moment ago. Can you remind me? You mentioned the rate of consumption of the plastic waste that you can utilize on this. In a 24-hour cycle, how many tons are we talking about? And how many tons are available from wherever you might source it from,
Yeah,
recyclers or
so
trash or what have you?
our target is 45 tons per day per
45
screw.
tons a day. Okay.
And I mean, we're going to be consuming for one full scale power plant right around 7 million tons of plastic per year.
Wow.
And I mean, getting not finding it's been easy. It's getting it from point A to point B
Yep.
that's been difficult. The logistics of everything, hence why we're in the process of acquiring a pre-treatment company to pelletize and extrude and pelletize the plastics so then we can ship them on the railroads
Much easier.
easier
Yeah.
because then we can just bulk freight it instead of
Yep.
trying to compact a bunch of I mean, imagine a bunch of plastic bottles
Yeah.
trying to ship that.
Right.
So
In a
we're in
giant
the
bale.
process of,
Yeah. You get rid of
yeah,
the bale and you make pellets.
yeah, and it also allows them to not be as easily to be blown away
Yep.
as well, but it allows us to bulk ship things significantly easier and allows us to store on site easier too. So our goal is to have 12 months of supplies stored on our power plant and gas stations. So
Okay.
we want to pre-treat and store as much. Essentially, think of the plastic as a battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of volume. Do you know how that fits on what do we what kind of plastic waste do we throw off in a year? And you're looking at 7 million tons.
I yeah, I mean I think at the end of the day when we're at our full development and operations, we need about 60 million tons a year. If I remember, it's only about 2% of the plastic we produce and consume per
Wow.
year.
Okay. That's still a substantial chunk. I mean, that's a lot. I get why you have trouble finding, sourcing, locating. Yeah, that's a lot of logistical
I mean,
issues.
we as just the United States, we make so much plastic and consume so much plastic.
Yeah.
The idea of people don't realize it's a fuel source. I mean, we're
Yep.
literally just throwing away a gallon of gas is the real comparable I can put it for some people, and that's fine. We can use it instead
Sure.
of just discarding it.
Yeah, that makes great sense. So you've kind of walked me right into some of the next couple of questions I've been thinking about, which is how do you see the link between some of these emergent technologies that will help with decarbonization and rising power demand? Of course, you're in Ohio, you're very familiar with the growing demand from AI and the chips factories and reshoring and all the things that are there. How are you kind of looking at some of this as being, how do you create the partnership to be a good partner to provide some of the energy that's needed, where companies have certain objectives, environmental objectives they want to meet. I feel this sounds like technology that would meet those objectives. And how are you kind of viewing that for the short, medium, and longer term as you think about your your area to participate in the energy system?
Oh, so I mean, reality is we create the gases and electricity. I mean, we can co-locate or we can put the gas plant somewhere along the pipeline to bring down those gases. What we've learned is that the electricity is only half the equation. The lack of natural gas in certain parts in Central Ohio
Okay.
was also extremely alarming to hear that. I mean, we're trying to build this area up to be, the heartland Silicon Valley, right? So. How are we going to achieve that when we don't have the natural gas resources? And that's not because the natural gas companies don't have it. They're just not allowed to bring their pipelines
Right.
down here. So there's that political agenda and bureaucracy essentially blocking what natural gas companies would like to be doing. And we can play that role and help them mitigate into those areas. And as we figure out the pipelines and we work through, because the pipelines benefit us as well,
Right.
because we put them on our RTC programs, renewable thermal credits, and they make money off of
Yeah.
us, and vice versa. So we want to take advantage of those tax benefits that are in place with the pipelines, and um, that's how we view ourselves, as that bridge from point A to point B. The reality is the need for natural gas to decarbonize the planet is going to, in our lifetime, is still going to be needed.
Hmm.
Whether that is, generating gray hydrogen. Let's say we achieve what we want to achieve at CE and get all of our power plants to 100% hydrogen. With pyrolysis, we can achieve that, but we also still need natural gas, and we still need the oil and gas companies' resources to make
Right.
this happen. Because the biggest investors in this transition, or as you call it, the expansion, is oil and gas companies, and
Hmm.
people can give them grief where they would like to, but they're the ones paying for this stuff to happen, hundreds and billions of dollars to see that happen. So from our perspective, is continuing to be that bridge. And
Hmm.
we understand that's how we're going to have to be for the time being. But having those resources, because we can move quickly, unlike, say, nuclear,
Right.
which is really the only other technology is capable of generating this type of baseload power per se. And but it takes 15 years to
Yeah.
even permit and construct a nuclear facility. Now, while I don't disagree with nuclear as an asset, it all has to blend together. They
Hmm.
all have to work in cohesion. One making a villain out of the other is why we continue to be in the mess that we're in.
Yeah, we couldn't agree with you more. There's no upside to a fuel war. We're going to need all the resources we can get as we see demand grow. So you
Correct.
mentioned a couple of things that raise questions. You're dealing with new technology. You're having to have it developed, constructed, and shipped. So how are timelines impacting you, or supply chain issues, or are there unique circumstances given this is a fairly novel technology, the way you're trying to apply it versus the way others have done it, that are helping or hindering? Are you, I guess asked another way, are you getting what you need in order to get where you want to go, or are there hiccups along the way?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And on the gas side, so on the power side, turbines are now becoming an issue, and we're running out of turbines, but they're not being built the way that we have they should be, I guess would be the best way to put it. And that is lack of manufacturing, which I will be talking about on the Eclon
Okay.
podcast that I'm doing. So that being said, that the lack of manufacturing for these type of assets, especially here in the United States, is extremely lacking. Is the best way to put it. And to make the energy transition happen, you have to have turbines, especially if you want a
Right.
hydrogen economy. So we need to be pumping those things out um, on a monthly basis, not a quarterly basis, where we are right now. And that's with Siemens, GE, and Mitsubishi. We've spoken to all of them, and most recent Mitsubishi and GE, and they're having to take reservation fees
Hmm.
of several $1 million at
Sure.
once. So when you're trying to build something
Yeah.
and get the development, you don't obviously want to just burn 10, 15, $20 million out the gate to
Right.
even secure the asset you're trying to build. So
So you mentioned the turbine hurdle. Are there other hurdles or challenges that you're facing? Is there a permitting issue with your technology, or are there things that are um, I'm not sure, market barriers or environmental regs? I mean, you're a bit of a unicorn in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, what are some of these
we
things like not an issue for you, or are they still an issue but in a different flavor?
they're not, and we're very specific on our site selections
Okay.
and where we're building plants. And as Todd, you're well aware of our government connections and our relationships with leaderships in most states that we want to target. The states that we're working with are they're phenomenal. Okay, they are the best in the union. I would also say, but they are very, very serious about not allowing blackouts to happen for their
Right.
citizens, but also trying to achieve new manufacturing, new business. That is a very narrow road and is a double-edged sword that a lot of these leaderships in Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Oregon, those states that we're working with and targeting, they're dealing with. But we're also not doing this just in the US, we're doing it in the UK and
Okay.
down in New Zealand. And the policymakers in the UK, they're right there with those same states. So it was, we actually had a call with policymakers in the UK a couple weeks ago, and how they're trying to expand the definition of recycling. So those recycling products
Hmm.
can then be applied to renewable energy credits. So they're actively trying to pursue policies similar to the Ohio Technology Chemistry Council's RPS law that
Hmm.
we had passed here in October of last year. Um, and our mutual friend John
Yeah.
Nelson made that happen, right? So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah. That being said, that we're very particular. We see the roadblocks and we try to avoid them or remove them before we get there.
Right. So as somebody that's actually doing new technology development, can you look at it from the other perspective and help us understand what are some other things that are needed to spur more innovation and development? Maybe not this specific technology, but other things. I know you've got your fingers in a number of different areas. I mean, what's needed to make that more attractive or to get people willing to make the leap from here to whatever that next innovative technology would be? Because you're doing it. So I think you're probably the best equipped to answer that question.
Yeah, I think it's a mind shift change around. I mean, our as you know, our global economy and our banks are very focused on quarterly returns, and
Right.
majority of investors are. This is that old phrase that you're going to plant trees that you don't know the shade of,
Yeah.
and that's one of my favorite quotes. And that's just the reality of it. And that mindset, and like we have to start thinking the way like the Rockefellers and Carnegies and the Fords did during the Industrial Revolution. And I think you've heard me say this and a couple of times talking, Todd, is I call this the environmental industrial
Hmm.
revolution. That's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So the thought process of like, hey, I want to see a return in 1 to 5 years is not going to happen.
Hmm.
It does take more time, and you actually have to be committed to the investment. And most investors are not. So.
So talk to me a little bit about how do you think about how consumers or taxpayers pick your payer? Um, how should they be thinking about building new resources that are going to be able to deliver on some of these reliability goals? As you know, our organization supports competitive markets. We think that's the best way to achieve it at least cost. It's better for consumers. It ensures reliability. But again, you're on the leading edge of some pretty innovative technologies. Do you think about those issues, or do you come back to what we were just talking about, where you say, look, I'd still have to make a return, but I don't need to make 100% of my return in the first 3 years. How do you think about that from the consumer's perspective? Because they're the off taker, right? It's the power and
Yeah.
what you're providing that's their benefit.
So we can continue with the competitive process that we have here in the United States, or we can go down to, say, the UK or to New Zealand as two predominant other markets that have very similar laws and structures that we
Hmm.
do, but they have market based. The average bill in the UK right now is between like £300 and £500 per month. We made a joke on that same call with the policymakers in the UK, where Americans would be flooding the streets,
Right.
picketing and being very angry. So, taxpayers here in America need to understand that it could be worse. From that perspective, we obviously don't want to make it more painful for the
Hmm.
American taxpayer and ratepayer. And I know, not just speaking for myself, but for other companies in the position that we're in, that but there needs to be an investment here. And like ADP and their transmission lines,
Right.
and they're trying to build transmission lines as quickly as humanly possible. But to make the transition occur with wind and solar included, those radio waves have to go to and from now, which is a substantial upgrade to what our technology was originally in our transmission line. So I think at the end of the day, bureaucrats need to understand that the way things were 20 years ago is not going to be the case, especially if we want to electrify our country the way we are and at the pace that we are. We have to start applying Moore's law to our energy generation, and we don't. As technology advances, the energy consumption will increase as well. So it's
Hmm.
that energy in, energy out concept that we
Yep.
have within CE. That is, it's just not there with not a lot, but some of the policymakers we've had conversations with. So,
Well, you brought me right to the $64,000 question here at the end, which is if you had one message that you wanted to leave with policymakers or with decision makers at an elected official or a regulatory level, what do they need to hear when it comes to energy and innovation? Because you've noted we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And as someone that's on the cutting edge, what is the thing that you want them to be aware of and help make sure that we can get from here to whatever that destination is? As you said, we're not going to see those trees, but how do we get from here to here there and enable that transition?
well, I mean, banking policies being the number one thing, and how you approach how projects are built in the infrastructure field, and then self-regulation around what. I mean, you're talking about the most regulated industry in the world, more than finance, more than healthcare, is what energy is, and that does create a lot of barrier of entries and difficulties to get these things from point A to point B. And that's half of it. And then it's also, maybe we should, get policymaker and bureaucrats to take a step back and let the companies that want to see these innovations, that have the dollars to do it, actually do it and refine it as we move forward. Because if we keep doing things the way we're doing it now, we're just not doing anything. We're sitting here on our hands. And the brownouts and blackouts in the United States are a prime examples of why we got to stop sitting on our hands and we need to actually move forward and find a solution today, not tomorrow, because fusion technology isn't coming anytime soon. We were children when that was the idea and the concept started. Well, I wasn't even in existence yet. So I mean, with that being said, I mean that's a great idea, and if we can make that happen, I'm all about it. But you still need a substantial amount of hydrogen to make that happen too. So that's a conversation for a different day. But policymakers
Right.
need to really look at stepping away and allowing the companies that have been doing this for decades, like the chairman of EPSA, like Alpine, that they're doing remarkable things and trying to make this problem go away. But it's being pushed away because they're still, utilizing coal and natural gas assets where need be. But reality is, some of these regions can't transition out of that tomorrow because it doesn't exist yet, and we need to give them that time to get there. And they're just not. Taxing these power plants to the oblivion. It's just going to cause them to shut down, and that's it. So.
Well, Russell, we have reached the end of our time together, and I'm certainly grateful that you took time to chat with us. I'm fascinated by the
Of course.
technology, honestly. It is It's cutting edge. It's very different. It solves a number of problems, which is, I think, what makes it so interesting. And hopefully, we'll see you in the next few months, get things really up and running, and over the next few
Yeah,
years, really see this be a game changer for both energy, recycling, the plastics question. I mean, you've got a lot of solutions that you can provide, and we're grateful that you spent the time with us.
absolutely. I appreciate it, Todd.
Thanks for listening to Energy Solutions. As always, subscribe to this podcast for more in-depth interviews with leading energy voices today. If you like Energy Solutions, we've got great news. This August, we'll be releasing a special series focused on one of the most pressing issues facing the energy industry and the nation as a whole: the impact rapidly developing AI technology and data centers have on rising power demand. Will we have enough megawatts to continue powering a reliable, cost-effective, and sustainable system in a changing grid? What's needed from policymakers to mitigate the strain on grid reliability? We'll find out with insights shared from a host of expert voices across all corners of the industry. If you like this episode, please share it on social media with your coworkers, friends, and family. You can also connect with us on X @EPSA News, on LinkedIn, and on Threads @Electric Power Supply. And subscribe, follow, leave a rating, or comment on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, and now YouTube. We'd love to hear from you.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 150,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.